This week's episode of the Cloudcast is brought to you by Intel Cloud for All, driving the creation of thousands of clouds.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the Cloudcast, coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. As a lot of you know, community events are playing a much bigger role in how all of us are learning, how we're keeping up with the people in our industry, how we're trying to keep up with sort of rapidly changing technologies, and whether those are meetups locally or they're big community events. We don't spend enough time kind of understanding kind of the guts of how those things work, because a lot of it is important for folks. It's how do I get stuff I want to talk about out there? How do you get your sessions accepted? How should you network with people? What are the best shows to go to? And tonight we're kind of excited. We have a little bit different thing. I know a lot of the times here we're probably, people will give us feedback that we're a little too US centric. So I'm very excited. Rachel, I'm going to get this. Roumeliotis.
That is
Did
correct.
I get that right?
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
And everybody knows I'm horrible at names, so I apologize. But
No problem.
she's co-chair of OSCON Europe. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Aaron and I have talked about this. We love the partnership that we have with O'Reilly. Not only because it gives us a little more access to what goes on at events like OSCON and Velocity and other ones, but that group helps us a lot in shaping some of the things that we put on the show. So excited to have you on. You are the co-chair for OSCON Europe. A lot of us have been to OSCON in Portland, but give us, we're a month away. It's, October 26th through 28th in Amsterdam. Give us the highlight, like what's cool and new and what are you excited about for OSCON Europe?
Sure. So it was really interesting putting OSCON Europe together. It was, when we were putting the program together, it was just a little bit before OSCON in Portland. So we knew what we wanted to do sort of for the US OSCON, and we wanted some of that flavor to make it across the pond over to Amsterdam. So maybe about 50% of sort of like best of, because as much as there are differences, there's similarities. And, it's obviously across the globe, there's no more communication barriers, really.
Right.
People are, interested in everything. So the other half of it, I really wanted to make sure that we were focusing on people that were local to Europe and topics that were local to Europe. So one of the more interesting ones was the idea of privacy and identity and security.
Yep.
And so that's a track that we're having at OSCON. And I feel that they're in a different spot than we are with that, I guess, maybe in the acceptance of privacy or less of it.
Right.
At least on the streets, like, within London, there's the CCTV everywhere. So it's kind of like we're watching you everywhere, Big Brother. And then I noticed when we were actually looking into doing some marketing and stuff for OSCON Amsterdam, when you go to a site that is Netherlands based, it actually has to ask you if it's okay if they use cookies.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right.
On your,
so
like
that
on your
was,
web browser, right.
Yeah. So I was like, what? So that was really interesting. So the mix is really different over there as far as what's okay, what's not okay, what they ask about. So that's one piece. And then the other piece there's two other pieces. One other piece I was excited about was the whole idea of, are there startups over in Europe and how different is that from sort of, Silicon Valley where like every other person has a startup.
Right.
What's the startup scene like in Amsterdam? I heard, Berlin has a good startup scene. What's going on in London? And so highlighting some of those. One of our keynotes is actually all about growth hacking and how do you, take that startup and blow it up in 5 years into a really big thing. And then finally the idea, and that we're sort of seeing this in the US too, but the idea that open source in and of itself is not really such a big story anymore. It's kind of the default.
Yeah.
And so,
That was something that I know we were talking to Sarah Novotny about, and she was on and she said, that's one of the big shifts at OSCON is that, it's not a sort of braggadocious thing of like, open source one, but it is it's mainstream now. And once it's not sort of keep Portland weird, off the
right.
thing, you have to treat it differently because sometimes it's who's in attendance, but also it's, we had Jim Zemlin from the Linux Foundation, and he's like, we are involved in major parts of the economy and major parts of government. And, people don't always think that, but it's like, open source is all over the place, and it is a mainstream thing now.
Yeah, absolutely. Over in, I know in Europe, like the government uses open source all over the place. And, and it's interesting too, because it is obviously there's many governments over there. And so it's very fragmented. And so to see how that's implemented across different countries is really, really interesting. And then the idea of like the open source is kind of de facto. So you could almost be like, yay, we won, right. Which I think I did say, but now I'm kind of, now, you look on, obviously there's still stuff to do. So how do you make sure that open source continues on, I guess what we think is a good path that keeps it sustainable for the people that have been, really passionate about it for the past 20 years, and for the enterprise folks who it's probably not about passion, but it's about, return on investment. How do you make it good for both of those people, and what can they learn from each other and keep it moving forward? So we'll be talking about that too in Amsterdam.
Very cool. Very cool. So, you talked a little bit about Europe being fragmented. I think we sometimes think about it like that in the States, because I think visually we look at Europe, whether you're going all the way from, the Scandinavian countries down to Italy and across, and we go, it's a pretty big space. It's a pretty big piece of land. And then I think sometimes we subconsciously forget it's, because we go, oh, it's the EU, but we forget it's 20 something countries, it's 20 something cultures, if not, dozens within each country. And it has its own sort of, technology centers like the US does. I mean, the Nordic countries are, have their own sort of technology bent. They've done things around mobile for a long time. The Eastern European countries, have their own sort of centers of technology. London's obviously one. How much does that, does that help a little bit, or does that make it just sort of infinitely harder because when you're planning these things, it's like, boy, who am I speaking to? Am I speaking towards the ones that are way ahead? Am I speaking towards the middle? How do you manage all that?
That is actually quite difficult. And OSCON is such a wide-ranging conference in terms of topics. And so one thing to keep in mind is that, wherever you have the conference, there is going to be a higher percentage of people that come from that place because it's easier to get to the conference, of course. And
right.
So, I looked a little bit about what was happening in Amsterdam, and like I said, there's a lot of startups there, software architecture topics, sort of like the fundamentals, of breaking into that area is something that seemed very popular there. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. So I guess, you aim for a little bit of everything,
right.
Someone that's a beginner, would want to, maybe do some like 101 type stuff, but also be interested in, what's the new language, or what is this person doing? And that's what I actually like about OSCON, is that whether you're, beginner or advanced or somewhere in the middle, you can kind of find the stuff where you are comfortable.
Right.
And then you can, I hope this is what you do a lot of, is you go outside of that comfort zone and, see how JavaScript can inform what you're doing in C++ and vice versa. And the other piece of that is not just the sessions, but talking to people in the hallways. Right. I always overhear people saying, that's the best part of the conference and stuff. And I'm like, that's great. We work really hard in the sessions too. But no, I acknowledge that's really great. And it's that sort of mix. I mean, we reorganized OSCON this year. The tracks used to be in programming languages.
Right. And
then we changed it around to sort of problems and solutions that developers face. There was performance and data and architecture and security. And because there's a tool and a language and a framework for whatever problem you have, and you have favorites, and you generally, more than one. And so it didn't make sense to be like, this is the Python track. So instead we did, this is how you do performance. Oh, this one, has Python, this one has Go. So that's the kind of thing. So I think that, beginner to advanced, again, will have, like they're always going to have a performance problem or a data problem. And so that's the hope. It's difficult.
Right. Let's shift gears a little bit. So, so you're the event chair, but your sort of day-to-day expertise is around software architectures. That track has a ton of really interesting stuff. I mean, distributed patterns and chaos around, dealing with distributed systems, microservices, which is kind of the hot buzzword these days, a lot of stuff around containers. What do you just, when you get above the buzzwords, like what are the things that you're finding people either, seem to be hoping to get out of that track, or the types of, sessions? I'm trying to wrap my brain around. I mean, everybody's sort of talking about it. There's plenty of sort of unicorns where, an application is a company and it's doing amazing things. How, if you had to rate that area in terms of like sort of 1 to 10 in terms of maturity, where do you see that space, and what are the big things they're interested in?
So what's interesting about that space is that it kind of goes through a sea change, I feel like, every 5 to 10 years. Yeah. So it's pretty fascinating. Like containers, for instance, you'll find, all of a sudden that has been a real big change into how things are done. But then people will be like, containers been around forever. So it's kind of weird. It's like this cyclical thing. And for whatever reason, this time it really, really caught on, and it's making sense, and it's changing the culture of the company. And so, software architecture too, we're really highlighting that because we're also finding that there's 2 types of situations. One where you're at a smaller company and really no one has the title of architect, which means that you all do, and you're sort of bumping up against it, or someone has to fix something. And so that idea of sort of breadth of knowledge versus depth of knowledge, and trying to give that, and we have an all-day tutorial on software architecture fundamentals, and going over, how you deal with that, that you don't have to be, the expert in something. You kind of have to know a lot about a lot. Yeah. So starting with that. And then the idea too that, software architecture, again, isn't like one person off in the corner, like I've created this. It's now, a big team, and that includes DevOps now. And a lot of people are saying too that, microservices, which believe me, we say like so many times a day, is sort of the first DevOps architecture that has come out. That the fact that, it's sort of loosely coupled, and that you can, upgrade and optimize and change things out as you go along and iterate, instead of it being just this huge monolithic thing that you have to do, make some major business decision to say, okay, we're gonna create something new.
Right.
So that's really interesting. And I think what I try to remember when we're putting stuff like this together is obviously there's like the hot topics and stuff. But the thing is that, even though I've been saying microservices like 72 times a day for like the past year, that doesn't mean like all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, we have microservices implemented. Like, I think there's lots of people that are still like, I've heard the word, but I don't actually know what it means. So for something like that, where it's so popular and so such a big change, having something where it is about like, what is this? Migrating to it. Like, don't be ashamed if you don't know what it is. Right. And then also the flip side being like, maybe that's not what the right thing for you. Maybe, SOA still is the right thing for you. So that's a little bit of my thinking around sort of like the architecture space. Yeah,
no, it's good. And I think it's always good when, obviously, it's driven by practitioners. It's driven by people that sort of have some scars from it. And you're right. It's a very weird time because, even though people tend to want to talk about the same things. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, you were going to talk about Netflix and kind of what they were doing, and now people want to talk about Uber and Airbnb. Mm-hmm. I think the reality of it is those things came on the scene so fast, and however fast that rocket is going to go, there are a lot of people who are going, it seems like it's the new thing, or it seems like it's cool, but it's almost like people are sort of afraid to go. I don't really know what it means, or I don't really know how to do it, or is my thing really as true to, what people talk about as it should be. So it's good that you've got sort of a mix of the basic stuff and then the beauty is, like you said, there's so much hallway conversation that you can kind of find people that will help you, or you'll find little groups that are standing around, and you can kind of augment what you may have been too nervous to raise your hand about, sitting in the session and asking a question or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I really hope it's welcoming in that sense. I mean, you can't know everything, honestly.
No, and like you said, it's such a broad conference because it's everything. I mean, it's sort of anything and everything, and whereas a lot of them, maybe focus on one area or another. Let me ask you. Let me shift gears one more time. One of the things that I find at events, and I don't know if it's a frustration or if it's just the natural evolution of when we're in the middle of a lot of change, but you'll see a lot of events that go on, and you look at the speaker lineup and you'll go, oh, it's those people again. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. Part of it is that's their job. Their job is to be out speaking and evangelizing and doing stuff. And part of it is, if they're an early adopter, they're probably smarter than a lot of people. How do you, when you're running an event, how do you make sure that, how do you manage kind of diversity? And part of it's diversity of, kind of people's backgrounds and technical skill sets, and part of it's, the typical, gender stuff and other things. But how much does that come into play when you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of submissions? Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's another really difficult thing.
There's no right answer, obviously.
Yeah. So basically for the OSCON events, we end up accepting about 10% of the proposals that we get in.
Yeah.
And so you're right. I mean, so there are some people that are so fantastic that have been there, either every year or a couple years in a row. And it's easy to say yes to those people because you're getting a great product, right? Or, they've just once again somehow come up with the session that is just everybody's going to want to go to.
Right.
And so what you have to make sure that you do is you have to take the time to look at the new people and the new content that those people have created, and look at their YouTube clips, see who they are, and really try and do a mix because I think with OSCON we have a return rate of 20-25%. So that's a quarter of the people there. So they don't want to see the same thing over and over again. So not only is it the same people, but it's the same topic. So if something's really popular, for instance, Docker, obviously really popular, still popular this year. So that's something you'll see again. That's a topic you'll see again. You might see one of the same people, but then we'd want to get someone else in. And then the thing about sort of diversity, male, female, all that type of stuff, that's really difficult. We're very cognizant of that when we're putting stuff together, with the idea that we want to put together the best program that we can. Right. Obviously independent of who the person is. And then keeping in mind, are there women here? Have they put in, and making sure that we let all different types of people know that the CFP is out there. Trying to be as open as possible with we're here to help. If you have questions on how to put together a good proposal, we can do that. And it just sort of comes together. It's I don't know. It's kind of back and forth a little bit. Yeah.
So we get a lot of people who will ask us, kind of off the record behind, and they'll go how did so-and-so, how do you think so-and-so got a session accepted? Or are there any tricks? Or you made a comment you'll go, obviously things are a little different these days because, you can go look at somebody's GitHub page and see the kind of projects they work on. And you can, it used to be well, I'll look at their blog, or maybe I know a little bit about them, or maybe the company they work for is interesting. How much kind of, I don't know if that's the right word, but how much scouting do you guys sort of do? Do you feel like you have to go figure out if that person has been out in public and doing things before you're kind of accepting of them?
Well, so we don't need an example of someone speaking, because obviously it could be their first time. Sure. We really encourage that, and that's helpful. If you don't have something like that, or you don't have a big footprint online, I guess I would just say your proposal has to be excellent. Yeah. Take microservices, for instance. So we'll get, 20 of those and we'll accept 2. And so it has to have a catchy title. It has to have, it has to encapsulate, some aspect of microservices that, like you said, like this chaos patterns one.
Right.
Like I was just like, that's cool. You know what I mean? Like people, I sometimes think about, so titling is obviously really important. So sometimes I think about myself just when I'm looking around at different things or, sci-fi books, and I'm just like, that looks cool. Like, let me look at that. So that's like the first thing.
Right.
And then I think what's important is that and this would go for any conference, when you're putting together the little summary, make sure that it's really succinct and really kind of ties into like, this is why people care, and make it really interesting. And then, do a couple of 3 to 5 bullet points. Like, this is what people that attend this will walk away from this with this knowledge, or, this action plan.
Right.
I think that's really important. Something really clear, something that you could complete in, 40, 50 minutes, and something sort of on point that, and if you read through CFPs, a lot of time we try to guide you to where we're going. Right. But yeah, I mean, I guess I would say the final thing I would say is take the time to do a really good job, because that makes a difference.
Right. Right. Yeah. And the reality is it's, and this is always a hard thing for sort of engineers to grasp, but it's like, you gotta market it a little bit. And whether that's, like you said, whether it's in a great title that's going to stand out, or whether that's in a great abstract, or whether it's like, if you really know something, like put it out there so people can find it, and they might go, wow, this is a diamond in the rough. And, and like you said, I think the open source events, probably more than anything, people are pretty excited. I mean, if you go up there and if you show up with something that you're passionate about, even if it's, only 5 or 10 minutes long, and you're only doing it, like, go do it. Like, get some experience doing it, and jump out there and see how it turns out. So
yeah, I definitely agree. And we're actually trying something interesting at OSCON next year. Where I created a track. I think this will work. We'll see if proposals come in for it, but we're calling it the in real life track. So we're actually telling people, like, these are case studies. Like, we want to hear about like successes you've had with open source and failures. So that's another sort of, if you're having trouble sort of figuring out how to frame something, if you can tell a personal story, I think that's another easy way to make it really interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that we hear every day from people is people are super excited at this point about all the different technologies that are out there. Like, it's almost like there's this sort of rejuvenation of stuff. And then the next thing they all try and figure out is, how do I get anywhere near there from where I am? And so any of those stories I think are great. Like, everybody wants to hear, like I always say, like you can kind of gauge the maturity of a market by how long it takes to stop talking about the unicorns and start talking about lots of successes or lots of people taking chances. So that's cool. I hope it works out. I hope it goes well, because that's the kind of stuff that, people need to hear, because they're sort of taking a chance on going, do I change? And, has somebody else sort of jumped off the cliff before I did into the water?
Yeah, I find that fascinating. Like, the idea of, okay, generally when you go into a new job, it's not that you're starting fresh on something. You're probably dealing with some, giant code base of something. What do you do? Like, how do you dig in? And,
right.
And do you do best practices? And when are you like, okay, we got to start over? That's a fascinating sort of area as well.
So last question, and then I'm going to kind of wrap this up, because we're sort of running late. So, obviously the sessions, all the topics at OSCON are always great. You can find what you like. Amsterdam's an incredibly cool city. Like, what other 1 or 2 cool things have you guys got going on that people might go, yeah, it's worth me, jumping over there for, a day, 2 days, 3 days?
So we are going to do a hackathon of open source data sets. That's cool. Going to be a continuation of one of the tutorials we're having, I think, with based on sort of graph database type stuff. So we're going to do that. We always have this, really try, like I said, the hallway track is really cool. And so during sort of the open times, which we try to have an ample amount of because of that, we try to group people together and say, there are places where you can go and hang out, like if you're a Pythonista, or if you're into microservices or privacy and stuff like that. So we have that going on. And then because Amsterdam is so cool, we did leave the evenings pretty open.
Oh, nice.
So to check the place out.
That's right. And hopefully they make it back by the next day.
I hope so. I'll be there.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for being on tonight. What's the best place for people to either, find you online, ping you, ask questions, or just find out more about OSCON Europe?
The best place is OSCON.com, honestly. And from there, you can find me. You can find out the more interesting stuff that's happening in Amsterdam and next year.
Cool. Very, very good. And next year, they're moving it up. They're moving it up to, is it April or May? And they're moving it to Austin.
Yeah, May 16th through 19th next year.
Very cool. So, well, listen, Rachel, thank you so much for being on, folks. As always, feedback is always welcome. We're excited to have Intel as a new sponsor. We're going to get into some very cool things with them. And for that, for myself and for Aaron, for Rachel, everybody, thanks for listening and have a good night.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.